Hey everybody, a couple days ago I made a video on prepping some parts for powder coating, and just wanted to go over some of the things. I got these parts powder coated, but I wanted to go over some of the things I learned. This is my first time powder coating. As I've said multiple times in my videos, I don't do how-to videos. This is just me documenting what I've done and try to share what I've learned, and I enjoy learning. That's part of the reason I'm doing this stuff. First of all, if you want to see the video on prepping the parts, you can go back. It's a previous video to this one. One of the things I did is I dipped these parts in muriatic acid, and that did a good job of cleaning them, and then I put them in a baking soda water mix to neutralize the acid, and then I dipped them in just plain water to rinse them off. One of the things I'd forgot, because it'd been a while since I've used muriatic acid, and I think it's the same if you sandblast, parts will start to flash rust very quickly, and I let them set overnight to dry off, and I guess I should have expected the flash rust, but it was worse than I thought. So I had some cleanup to do before I could actually powder coat them. But I got that taken care of. The first thing I powder coated was the pumpkin cover, the differential cover for the Ford 8.8 rear end. So I got the system set up, and when I went to powder coat the differential cover, the very first time I pulled the trigger, I had a huge puff of powder. Way too much came out. It stuck to the differential. It was kind of clumpy, and I should have known better. I should have stopped right then and brushed it off, started over. But I thought, well, maybe those clumps will flow when it goes in the oven. They didn't. I baked it in the oven, and overall it went well, but I had these big hard clumps of powder, and I thought that maybe I could sand those down and then give it another coat, but that sanded like iron. That powder's extremely tough, and I'll get into what brand of powder here in a few minutes. But so I tried sanding it. That didn't work, and I thought, well, I'll just strip it, and I used some aircraft paint stripper. That didn't even touch it. And I even, when I was dipping these other parts, I dipped it in the muriatic acid, and that didn't touch it. So anyway, I've still got that differential cover to do. I may try some heat. I may take it to somebody that's got a sandblaster. But one thing I'm confident about is that this powder is going to be very durable on the parts that I do get powder coated. So that was my first big mistake. If things don't look like what they should before you bake it, don't bake it. Brush it off, vacuum it off. Well, I guess you're not supposed to use a vacuum, but brush it off and start over. Second thing I learned, that big puff of powder, I think, was from two things. The instructions said use 10 to 15 psi of air pressure. I had it set on 12. I think that's way too much. I backed it down to about 5 psi and had much better luck. The other thing is I learned to just barely touch the trigger, not to pull the trigger all the way, but just barely open it up to get a lighter mist of powder, and that helped a bunch. And the final thing on that I think helped that is don't use a full canister of powder. The gun I have came with empty canisters, and then the canisters of powder I bought appeared to be the exact same canister, just full, and I just put a full canister of powder. I think you're much better off with half to a quarter of a canister of powder. That's where my gun worked the best. Again, I had a Harbor Freight gun. It's probably 10 years old, but had never been out of the box. And how I ended up with that is a friend of mine had it and had never used it, and I traded him something for it. and then I bought the powder because he didn't have any powder. So that's how I ended up with that. It's an old Harbor Freight powder gun, but it worked fine. And the Harbor Freight powder, like I said, appears to be very durable. So those were that was my first lesson. I did that on one day. I was frustrated, gave up, came back another day, and the second day I had a storm blowing in, and I wanted to try to get some parts coated and in the oven before the storm hit. And when I was trying to spray the powder on, it wasn't sticking to the parts. It was literally rolling right off. And again, I got frustrated. The storm was rolling in. My experience has been when you get in a hurry and things aren't going well, to just walk away and come back another day. So that's what I did. I didn't bake it. I just walked away, left the powder on it, came back another day, brushed the powder off, started through it again, and found out what my mistake was. With my gun, there's 4 things you have to do. You have to have the negative lead attached to the part or to the wire rack. You have to turn the unit on. There's a pedal you have to press all before you start spraying. And the 4th thing, the one that I forgot, is you have to plug the unit in. I had it plugged into a power strip, but the power strip wasn't plugged into the wall. So that's why the powder was just falling off and wasn't sticking to the part. So after that, I got everything plugged in, everything prepped, and sprayed the powder. I did 2 coats on most of these pieces. What I did was I did one side at a time, because I don't have a means of hanging them and spinning them, and even if I did, there's not a good way to hang them in this little toaster oven. So I just did one side, I powder coated it, I baked it, and then I brought it out, and while it was still hot, I gave it a second coat, and then put it back in, baked it, and let it completely cool. Then I flipped it over and did the other side. Now these parts are off a 1976 Nova. They were very rusty and crusty. I got all that rust off, but I do have pitting. And one thing I was interested to see was whether that powder would flow and fill those pits. And in my case, it did not. Now I don't know if you put it on heavier, if it would do that or not. I'm not too concerned. I'm not trying to do a show car here. I'm just doing a hot rod for me. But in my case, this did not fill the pits. These pieces are the where the leaf spring connect to the unibody in the front of the leaf spring. Try to zoom in so you can see the pitting. And maybe more coats would help this, I don't know. I will continue to experiment as I go, but my primary thing that I'm wanting to accomplish is remove the rust and protect them for future. These are the brackets that go under the differential on the leaf spring U-bolts that hold the shock absorbers and also hold the axle in place. Here are some of the other pieces that I powder coated, and overall I'm very happy with how this is turning out. Here's the setup I used. This is just an old toaster oven from the kitchen. You know, an oven as it gets older, it gets dirty inside and doesn't clean up. Plus on this one, the digital display works sometimes and other times it doesn't. But I know that if I hit bake and hit the up arrow 2 times, it'll be on 400 degrees. It always comes on at 350, so hitting the up arrow once goes to 375, second time takes it to 400, and by default it runs for 30 minutes, and that's what I've been doing. I know they say you should use a temp gun and wait till your part gets up to temperature and then time it, but I ran it for 30 minutes at 400 and things seem to do fine. This is the Harbor Freight unit that I traded my buddy for. You can see the powder is, on this gun, the powder is up above. I think that's part of the reason that when it's full you get too much. At least for me, I'm going to make it half to a quarter full. The powder I used came from Harbor Freight also. It's a matte black. I think I would prefer a satin. I'm not a big fan of a high gloss, but instead of the matte, I think I would like to try to get some satin to use the next time. Hope this is helpful to any first-time powder coaters. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. God bless.